Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Today is Thursday, May 27th, 2021. Inflationary terms, it's May 45th, 2086. But I digress. Joining us today is not Dwayne Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show. No, he is off doing something with the Republican governors. He and Hugh are on the road this week. He'll be in tomorrow night for his after show, but he is otherwise occupado. But joining us today in his place is AJ Kaufman from alphanews.org, alphanewsmn.com. Great columnist there. He's covering everything both inside and outside of Minnesota. And normally we would have had a show scheduled for this coming up Monday, but of course it's Memorial Day, so that wasn't going to work. And AJ's here with us today. AJ, welcome back to the show. And I know that you're out of breath because you were rushing to get back in front of the microphone there.
I was rushing to try to cancel our interview because I don't do one-on-one interviews with Caucasian males, like Lori Lightfoot.
Yeah. I fooled you. I said that I identify as a purple people eater. So, it's okay. It's all good.
Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, Minnesota Vikings. Exactly. Great to have you with us. And by the way, great to have everyone with us. Severe Cruise Conservative says there's an echo on this. I'm not sure if I'm not seeing why there should be an echo. Shouldn't be an echo. But I certainly hope that there's not one. I suspect that you're not hearing an echo on your.
I hear you fine, Ed. Does everyone hear me okay?
Well, I'm hearing you. I'm not sure if I'm not hearing you twice. I can say that. All right. So he says the echo is on AJ's audio. So let's let you talk, and I'll see if I can figure out what that's about.
Okay. Well, it's good to be here, and I'm hoping to talk about issues that we've had in the past week and a half, I guess now, or two and a half weeks since you and I last spoke about the beginning of the Israel-Hamas conflict, which has been quelled for now a week ago. We'll see how long that lasts, and then we're going to go on to talk more about, as you said in your hot air preview, about the GOP and their future and the midterms coming up, as well as COVID hopefully reaching its end and certain mask mandates being lifted across the country, and maybe some economic talk at the end due to some of the news coming out probably tomorrow about a new budget that the president has set forth.
Well, there's a lot of things going on here. Of course, the big issue this week for Democrats now is there's two big issues. One is the lab leak issue, which sort of blew up in Joe Biden's face this week after the Wall Street Journal reported that he had actually quashed, or his administration anyway, had quashed a State Department investigation into the lab leak theory, and arguing apparently that they didn't trust the people that were running it. That doesn't really explain why you would stop investigating it. It might explain why you might change personnel involved in investigating it, but it doesn't explain why you'd stop investigating altogether. And then once that popped up, all of a sudden everybody started taking this seriously. I mean, it was like the media turned on a dime. Facebook stopped deleting posts based on this on this topic. It was just it's the strangest thing. It's almost like a Soviet era change in official history sort of thing.
I don't. It's a shame this has to be political. I'm not on Facebook, as you know, but I did hear from people I know that they had been removing posts discussing the lab leak. Our friend Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, who very likely could be a presidential candidate in 2024, even before this past week or so when he's been redeemed, and was really vilified, wasn't he, Ed, for back in February for saying that, we don't know where this originated, and it might be at the level 4 super laboratory that researches human infectious diseases. Not exactly controversial, but you would have thought it was QAnon saying that. And this guy's a Harvard law grad and a U.S. Army captain, and pretty sharp dude. And a year later, all of a sudden, once Rochelle Walensky and Dr. Fauci starts saying it's possible that a lab-based origin is the genesis of the virus, then all of a sudden the newspapers and the social media start saying, yeah, maybe so. There won't be an apology. And it's really unfortunate that people are shunned or mocked or scoffed at for, and this is not even a hyper-partisan fringe theory. And PolitiFact, even left-leaning PolitiFact, even mentioned that we're gonna rehash this and have a little editor's note here saying that the assertion is now being looked into and disputed, and they removed the warning label, whatever they put on, saying that it's conspiracy. So we don't know, but we certainly should ask the questions, and we certainly should trust. I don't think we should trust the CCP to be honest here.
Good. I think what we all have to bear in mind here is that there isn't really a lot of evidence for any of these theories. There isn't a lot of evidence for a zoonotic transfer. I mean, people just assumed that it was a zoonotic transfer because we've seen that before in that region in wet markets prior to this. But there's no indication that this virus was actually in an animal population in that area or any place else. There are no intermediate animals that have been identified for this. That is just a hypothesis. Zoonotic transfer is just a hypothesis in this case, and it doesn't have even it has as much evidence for that as you have for the lab leak. There's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of hypothesizing, but it's not even a theory, because theories in science, theories have evidence. Proposals are hypotheses. This is the zoonotic transfer is a hypothesis. So is the lab leak. Neither one of them have evidence to establish them. However, both have circumstantial. There's circumstantial and anecdotal evidence that you could see in both. But that's the reason why you have investigations. And my issue on this is, if it was a zoonotic transfer, if China's correct and it's a zoonotic transfer, then they would already have the intermediate animal, right, or animals through which this chain took place. And they don't have that. They would have the evidence of infection or spread within that wet market in Wuhan, which is what everybody presumed was the origin spot for that, and they haven't established that either. What they have said is, we're not going to talk about this anymore. It's time to look at other countries. I don't even know what that means, because it's very clear it came out of China. China was locking down Wuhan in late December and early January before it spread any place else. That alone to me says the lab leak is a pretty good possibility, and that's been true since February of last year. Which is the reason why Tom Cotton was talking about it.
Yeah, it's do we expect China or the WHO to have a rigorous investigation on a life and death issue that has killed 3.5 million people and cost 20 trillion in lost revenue? Or are we going to, what do we expect at this point, though? Because sure, they were engaged in viral research at the Wuhan Institute. I still want that T-shirt, by the way. And they have, I'm sure they have interns there like we do, and it seems pretty plausible that could have leaked out of there and been covered up. But what do we do going forward? Biden has been, lukewarm to any ideas, but I guess the Senate, was it yesterday or today, voted unanimously to have him release the findings. I forget the exact terminology of it. You can remind me of what it was. It happened this morning or last night. They had a unanimous vote. And also, but then he said 90 days to investigate, what's going on. I mean, like you said, it's been a year and a half. They've already moved on and obfuscated the truth, I'm sure. This is not, we're not dealing with, Switzerland here. It's unfortunate. I think an audit, I think is the word someone used, would be good. And, but getting back to the politics of it, it's amazing that was even political. You can understand sort of how masks unfortunately become political, but that the pandemic, the origins of the pandemic became ideological because elite public opinion didn't want to entertain this idea that's not exactly conspiratorial or populistic about the lab leak. I mean, experts disagree on issues. They come together, they talk, they have a consensus. You don't have to pass blame on everyone at once. But at the same time, talking for a year and a half while China hides the evidence or what have you is getting us nowhere. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next 90 days. And I don't know if anyone's even having the discussion that you're having with me right now, besides on some podcasts. And certainly it doesn't seem like there's any impetus on the left, surprising me, to get to the bottom of this.
It is surprising. I'm going to make a quick change here, AJ, because I'm hearing that I'm not hearing an echo, but apparently it's coming through, and so I'm going to guess I'm going to make a quick change here and see if this doesn't help the problem a bit. We will. Why don't you go ahead and give us a like a 3 count or so.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1.
All right. Well, let's see if that doesn't. You're still good in my ear. Let's see if maybe that doesn't.
Is anyone besides Mr. Cruz conservative? Is Jeff Dunitz or anyone in the chat room hearing an echo?
Oh yeah, Jeff is hearing it. Matthew Dill is hearing it over on the Facebook side, and we certainly appreciate everybody being around here and doing the stuff here. And Severe Cruz conservative says, have him read the Gettysburg Address. I think that's 1234 Main Street, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what the problem could be. I'm just using the computer like I always have with the same setup, so I don't know, folks. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think we're just going to have to muddle through it today, and we'll work on it later. Hopefully, it's not too bad, and we'll be able to keep it from going on too much. And I'm just double checking to make sure I don't have it running back through the same computer in another frame, and it doesn't look like I do, so I'm not sure exactly where this would be coming from. At any rate, the 90-day thing, 2 things about this. One is that handing it off to the intelligence community tells us that the Biden administration doesn't think that they're going to get an answer from China, right? Because otherwise they would go through NIH or NIAID and work through the scientists in China. Clearly, they don't expect to get anywhere with that, so they're handing it off to the Intel group, because the Intel group can try to get to the data that may or may not tell the story here. The second thing is that the 90 days is a great way for Biden to let this thing cool down, right? I mean, 90 days from now, people maybe won't be as caught up in this. I kind of think that after having spent a year in lockdown, it's not really going to calm down a whole lot in 90 days. But at least there's a possibility that it might dial the temperature down a little bit here. And secondly, I also think that by putting a time frame on this, is that they're really not expecting to get an answer. They just want to be seen as trying to get an answer. I don't think that they will. I don't think anybody's ever going to know this, because I think China's got this thing so locked up tight that nobody's ever going to get a real answer to it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think, it's important not to always play politics in these things, like you might see on the evening opinion shows on Fox or CNN. But the fact that Trump, Pompeo, Cotton, and others were talking about this and being vilified just because they're Trump, Pompeo, and Cotton, and the racial component, which shouldn't even exist, but somehow does, about saying that it came from a lab, which apparently is racist, but saying that it came from a wet market, which is not racist. You saw that on Twitter yesterday. I do follow Twitter a bit. New York Times columnist talking about how it was it's quite racist to say it came from the lab, and a lot of.
Oh, did we just lose AJ? I think we might have just lost AJ. Yep, and we did just lose AJ, and he's coming back on. And
okay, I not knocked off and came back on. What was I saying?
I don't know, because all of a sudden you stopped, and I was like, okay, did I do that?
No, I was still talking, and then
I was Urkel.
Right. I was still talking, and then all of a sudden the screen was gone. But I was just saying that on Twitter yesterday, my favorite place, even though I don't have an account, there was a New York Times reporter who said that basically it's racist to bring up that it happened in the lab, and she was sort of mocked. Aside from the fact that's a crazy claim, people were saying, is it less racist to say it came from a wet market in an Asian country where people are throwing? I mean, it's either way, people are going to have their interpretations, but certainly the lab is not any more or less racist than saying it came from a rural Chinese wet market. And it just shows you how silly. Right, I think less so. And there's no way to have a serious conversation when people are going to somehow bring that up. And we'll see. We'll see what happens, and maybe it becomes a campaign issue next year, but I kind of doubt it.
Well, the interesting thing about that, and this has been true all along, was true back in January of 2020, when Donald Trump stopped international travel between the U.S. and China, the last week of week of January 2020, because of this. And you had Nancy Pelosi accusing him of being racist. You had Joe Biden calling him xenophobic, or his policies xenophobic, to be accurate. And it turned out to be the right move. Now, I'm not saying that everything that Donald Trump did in this pandemic was correct. I think there were a lot of missteps, and I think there were a lot of missed opportunities for Donald Trump in this. But that was a smart move, shutting down travel when he did. And by the way, the rest of the world ended up following suit. They shut down international travel. Some places still don't want Americans traveling to their country.
Yeah, like Canada.
Like Canada, for instance, or Italy. One of my friends, Christine Roussel, who used to work at Town Hall, now works at Catholic News Agency, got assigned to Rome just in the last week or so, last 2 weeks. And so she has a work visa, and they will allow that. But at the moment, Italy is still not allowing American tourists to come to the country. And so, I mean, those aren't xenophobic. That's what you do in a pandemic, is you try to limit.
And at some point last summer or winter, Cuomo and I think Biden and Democrats were looking at banning travel from, was it England or somewhere, more so than Republicans were. And,
it wasn't the UK. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's interesting that at every step of the way, anything that has to do with China, whether you're calling it the Wuhan virus, or in some cases the Kung flu, which was kind of a funny joke, but people didn't cotton to that. Everything that, if you even mention China in relation to the virus, the media just focused on that as a racist attack, and you have. And I'm going to segue into a different topic, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning this. Is that every time that there was some sort of hate crime against Asian Americans, it was because people were talking about China and COVID, which is sort of nonsensical. And at the same time, or maybe not at the same time, but pretty close to the same period of time, because remember, the Congress just got done passing this anti-Asian hate crime legislation. What was it, a month ago? It was just recently.
Biden gave that fiery speech about a week ago, so maybe the legislation was a month ago, but the signing was only about a week ago.
So yeah, maybe it was only a couple of weeks ago that Congress passed this. So then all of a sudden, Israel and Hamas are in a war with each other. Hamas is shooting rockets at Israel. Israel's responding. And you've got members of the squad who are calling Israel an apartheid state, and they're accusing them of committing genocide against the Palestinians, and all sorts of hate crimes get committed against Jews in the United States. In Los Angeles, in New York, all over social media, you're seeing these attacks by pro-Palestinian caravans on people who are just dining outdoors. And nobody really wants to call that out. Nobody's talking about how, well, not nobody, and I will say this, it's not nobody, but the media somehow doesn't draw the same.
It took them a long time. It really is amazing how long it took them. By the way, Israelis are Asians also, for what it's worth. I mean,
yeah, sure,
Israel,
yeah. Asia Minor, yeah.
Asia Minor, Anatolia, Western Asia. I get it. There's a difference between the Middle East and China, but regardless, no consistency. Yeah, you're right. I mean, FBI stats show that Jews are overwhelmingly the victims of more anti-religious hate crimes, which is a term that is debatable whether how it should be used.
I agree.
Yeah, thank you. I think smart people know that term is, at the very least, it's silly. But nonetheless, they are the victims of more hate crimes of any ethno-religious group. And we saw that again. And whether it's by the way, it could be in the U.S. or in Europe. In France, the Jews are like 1% of the population. They're 50% of the hate crimes. In the U.S., it's similar. 2% of the population, 60% of the hate crimes, something like that. So yeah, but this was different, Ed. This was not attacking Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn. This was driving down the streets of West L.A. or even Manhattan in caravans with flags, harassing people, asking if they're Jewish, and then attacking them, yelling racial slurs, throwing bottles, burning the Israeli flag, and yelling Allahu Akbar. So you know where they're coming from. And it took Biden and Harris and a few congressmen like Dean Phillips here in Minnesota and Ted Deutsch in Florida and a few others came out and condemned it. But everyone else didn't. And then when they did, they had to link it to Islamophobia, which is the subject of my article. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before. I think it was yesterday. And that's the funny thing. It happens to come down to race. They have to bring it into race or politics or what have you. And the squad has done a great job of saying we must condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, which is fine if there were Islamophobia going on currently, which, sorry to tell you, there isn't.
Right.
There was for 9/11. There isn't now. So why are they linking it? It's, I'm not going to read you my article, but it's the intersectionality idea where you have to unite all the various sects of the Democrat Party into one grievance-filled, angry tent and act like everything's equal. And it's been terrible. The Hamas squad has been, these attacks that are going on in our major cities are probably because of what's been said on social media and in Congress by those 4 or 5 people: Omar, Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, AOC, Jamal Bowman, Jayapal from Seattle, Cori Bush from St. Louis. You have to link it. Certainly more than you can link Donald Trump to a few attacks on Asians by mentally deranged people in San Francisco or New York. So,
yeah. I mean, those were not organized. Those were one-offs. The stuff that happened over the past week with these attacks in Los Angeles and New York, those were organized.
Oh, very organized. And not to make light of the anti-Asian crimes, they're terrible. But I think almost all of them were done by people who had just been out of prison or were mentally unhinged. And maybe they were targeting Asians, but they were just kind of one-on-one, one-off targeting people. And people died. It was terrible. They weren't white supremacists that were doing the attacking on the Asians. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. You just go through the cases and you can figure out.
They weren't evangelical Christians from Minnesota or Alabama either.
Nope, they were not. But the issue here, I think, is just consistency, right? I mean, if you're going to draw those kinds of lines, then draw them every single time. And if rhetoric from government officials drives these things, then why aren't more media outlets calling out, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the rest of the squad and the squad wannabes? Now, with that said, 4 House Democrats actually did call them out. They didn't call them out by name.
Right. Not by name.
Not by name. Then again, they also didn't call out Marjorie Taylor Greene by name, even though clearly there was a reference to her in this as well. When they were talking about mask mandates and vaccinations, being compared to the Holocaust.
Which we all condemned, at least everyone I know on the right.
I mean, I don't know how you get stupider than that. I mean,
let me tell you something. My articles, my responses that I got from some of my liberal friends to the article on Islamophobia and on Hamas were almost all, why don't you write an article about Marjorie Taylor Greene? And I guess I could. I don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I was appalled when she won the primary in Georgia last year. I think she's an idiot. I think she's maybe anti-Semitic. She's certainly not very intelligent. She's probably bigoted. And she probably hurt us in Georgia in the Senate races, too. So she's terrible. And I wish she left Congress. So hear me out, liberals. I despise Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, will you call out the 6 or 7 people that I mentioned by name, like I just did? I don't think they will. The media certainly won't. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is like their favorite punching bag. She has no influence. She has no committee assignments. She was stripped of them. She's not on the Armed Services Committee like Ilhan Omar is, and she's not a social media star like all of the people on the squad are, who are very popular in the party. Whether or not they run the party instead of Pelosi is debatable. Some will say they run the party you no way to judge that. But they're certainly more influential and popular than Green or the other 3 or 4 Republicans who are kind of out there, the Lauren Boebert, Paul Gosar from Arizona. We got rid of Steve King. I think the Republicans police their own. I know it may sound cliche. I think that Trump was called out when he did silly things by a lot of Republicans. I think Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley were called out on January 6th. Heck, I think they call out Kevin McCarthy when he does things. And people who hate Mitch McConnell, I'm not one of them, always call him out when he does things that they think are wrong, but that might be a different topic. The Democrats, it sounds cliche, they do not police their own. 2 years ago when these women, and they are women, Omar, Tlaib, so on, were spreading anti-Semitic invective, nothing. They were going to call them out, right? But then there was like a backtrack, and they said, we call out all forms of bigotry, blah, 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 blah. Horrible. Just horrible. You call out none when you call out all of them.
That's exactly right. I don't know if you can... I don't know if I would say that Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments on mask mandates and vaccinations were anti-Semitic. I think whenever you muddle the comparison to the Holocaust with silly stuff, it detracts from the seriousness of what actually happened in the Holocaust. I actually did write about Taylor Greene's
you
comments.
did. I remember.
And on the issue of anti-Semitism, it's like, that's not even really the point. The point here is vacuous stupidity. and there is no the comparison that she made is so obviously ridiculous that anybody with 3 brain cells to rub together would understand why it doesn't work and why you're an idiot for having made it. I'm not even going to go back through the post. There is no comparison. It's like saying spilling my milk is like living through a tsunami. I mean, it's
okay.
Stupidity on that scale. I will just say that.
And look, and I hope she's primaried because her district, interestingly enough, her district, which I visited right before the Georgia Senate race, is northern Georgia, especially northwest Georgia, is the most conservative part of the state, and it's where Trump and she and a few others, in my opinion, watered down the vote, with all some of their conspiracies about the election, and cost us 2 seats because that turnout was like 75% as high for the Senate races as it was for the presidential election. So I hope she's primaried and we get rid of her because I don't think she's very helpful. She's a vote, but the House Republicans tend to stick together. But on the other hand, the Democrats, there was a primary of Omar this last summer, a very impressive, very liberal Democrat here in Minneapolis, but he got crushed by her by 30 or 40 points, even though he out fundraised her. And AOC's primary challenge faded out, and they're not going to beat Tlaib in Detroit or Pramila Jayapal, who's really awful, by the way, in Seattle. So they're not going anywhere. None of their squad's going anywhere. The GOP, I think, tries to get rid of some of their bad members when they can. Steve King, right away, the example.
Right.
So yeah, it's frustrating. Jamal Bowman. By the way, Jamal Bowman, I think that's another one I was going to mention from the Bronx. He replaced Elliot Engel, who was a pro-Israel older Democrat. He won the primary, and he's part of the anti-Israel squad too, while synagogues are being defaced in his district.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And so to get back to the 4 Democrats who actually called them out, Dean Phillips being among them, Minnesota 3, Jewish, and represents a district that has a fairly significant Jewish population. Minnesota 5, I think it's a little
bigger in Ilhan Omar's district.
Yeah.
St. Louis Park. Yeah, ironic.
Ironically, but still, Minnesota 3, it's there as well. And Dean Phillips standing up and saying, this is contributing to the cycle of hate and violence against Jews in America, and it needs to stop. And 3 other Democrats joining him in this letter. And this was an open letter addressed to Joe Biden, urging him to find bipartisan ways to dial down the anger and rhetoric. But what it does, politically speaking, is it really kind of cut the knees out from under Nancy Pelosi, because this came out after Taylor Greene's comments from last week and this weekend,
right,
or Monday, and Pelosi had already started to just redirect the attention back to Taylor Greene, away from the squad members, and these 4 Democrats threw some sand in the gears of that strategy. They brought that back forth and forced the media to cover it at least somewhat. Now, I didn't see a ton of coverage in this.
There wasn't much coverage. I mean, conservative media, sure, and maybe some articles, generic articles in the AP, but I don't know who the other three were, by the way. Was Ted Deutsch one of them in Florida? I assume.
No, Josh Gottheimer?
Oh, from New Jersey. Good guy.
New Jersey. Luria from New York, I believe.
Okay.
And my goodness, I'm trying to remember who the fourth person is. I can look it up really quickly.
Yeah, well, while you're looking it up, that's good. That's four. I mean,
right.
the support for Israel on the Republican side is, I assume, if not 100%, 99%. There might be a few wacky libertarian Thomas Massey types out there. No offense to any of our libertarian friends. I'm not sure how pro-Israel he is. But my gosh, the left is building a narrative that supporting Israel is Islamophobic. That's what I'm noticing. And that's Ayanna Pressley and Cori Bush are basically equating Palestinians to black people in America that are being oppressed. It's a bizarre comparison. That doesn't really work. But it's crafting a message that they're watering down Dean Phillips's comments and making it basically an all lives matter thing when it comes to Palestinians, Native Americans, all their groups. It's unacceptable to me. But it's intersectionality, which people laugh at. Oh, intersectionality. Intersectionality is very, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but it's a very clever and deceitful tool being used by progressives to coalesce Democrats. Because why should the Pan-Asian Student Union at Cal Berkeley be anti-Israel? Why should the LGBT group at University of Minnesota be anti-Israel? Because of intersectionality, because of oppression. And they don't even have the actual facts of the history of Israel. As you know, you had that clip on your website last night, Portland State University. Maybe not the best example, probably one of the most left-wing schools. But, Israel genocide, yeah, I'm sure they know all about the history of Israel, these 19-year-olds that are out there.
Kathy Manning was the fourth signatory on that letter.
From where?
Kathy Manning, I don't remember where Kathy Manning is from. I can look that up, but I looked at the letter. I didn't look up the...
Okay, that's okay.
But let's take a look, because I think it's North Carolina, actually.
Interesting.
Yep. North Carolina.
Okay, so
she's North Carolina 6. So that's the Piedmont Triad, Greensboro.
Okay. Not an area with a huge amount of Jews like you might find in the other districts. But 4. Okay. Biden never gave a real speech on this, by the way. I mean, he touched on it, how it said we support Israel, which is good. I do believe, contrary to what some people might think, that the Biden-Harris administration, for all their myriad faults, doesn't seem to be openly anti-Israel. I'm very careful here. Like I thought the Barack Obama administration was. Certainly openly anti-Netanyahu. Biden's problem is he has Robert Malley working for him on the Iran deal, who is openly anti-Israel and probably anti-Semitic. You can link the two, and is now giving in on all the sanctions. Different topic, but I would have liked a speech, a perfunctory 5-minute speech about anti-Semitic crimes. He gave a fiery one the same day about anti-Asian crimes, and that's all well and good, but he didn't do that with Israel, at least not publicly. And Harris, much as I despise her, does have a Jewish husband, and doesn't, I'm not going to say she's pro-Israel, because I don't know, but doesn't seem to be overtly anti-Israel, which sadly is pretty much a compliment for a lot of young Democrats these days. Look at Betsy McCollum in St. Paul.
Yeah.
Anti-Israel, as far as I can tell. Middle-aged white lady represents a district that has a decent Jewish population. She's probably one of the top 10 most anti-Israel reps in the country. Why? I'm asking you. Why?
Oh, why? Because she's progressive, and progressives have become more and more outright anti-Israel. Now, this is interesting because this is the point I wanted to bring up.
You're right, by the way.
There's going to be a cost to this. Fox News poll, and I know people are going to say, well, it's Fox News. I'll get to that in a second.
Their polls are polls. They're not biased polls.
Yeah, Fox News poll is actually their pollster tends to be a little. Let's just put it this way: they tended to underestimate Donald Trump's support.
Right, Donald Trump doesn't think Fox News' polls are right wing. Believe me.
No. In the same poll that I'm just about to discuss. Joe Biden has a 54% approval rating and a 64% approval rating on COVID handling. Just to give you an idea what the sample is like, this is not a a poll among Fox News viewers.
It's a poll, just like ABC News polls are not polls of ABC viewers, right?
So this Fox News poll shows that when asked to choose between Israel and the Palestinians, almost by a 2-to-1 advantage, 59 to I think it was 34%, 59 to 34%, people chose Israel. Now this is, and people was, well, okay, so you'd expect that. Well, no, because they don't ask this question very often. Last time they asked this question was 20 years ago, and this was in the middle of the Intifada, and or it was right after the Intifada, I think the second Intifada, and when they asked it then, it was 35-11 or 34-11.
With the other 50%
undecided. They didn't make a choice. Well, this is significant to me, right?
Yeah.
Because in the intervening 20 years, American voters have made a decision, and they have decided to come down on the side of Israel. And if you look through the demos of this, you go through the crosstabs and you look at the demo results in this poll, there isn't more than an 11 or 12% undecided in any of these demos, and most of them are single digits, just like the overall result is a single digit under unknown. Every single demo shows, with the exception of liberals, I think self-described liberals, which would be mostly your progressives, every single demo supports Israel. Most of them by majorities, and that includes independents, it includes women, it includes men, it includes different income levels. The ethnicities the ethnicities were more pluralities. Like for instance, Hispanics it was 48-36, blacks it was 44-37, but still favoring Israel over the Palestinians if you have to choose between the two. Urban voters 50-32. Which I found very interesting because that's the Democrats' base or urban voters.
Yeah, but Jews tend to be urban.
True enough.
I say that as a Jewish person, by the way, if anyone's unaware. So I can criticize or praise. I got my Israel hat on today, by the way, folks.
I see that. Yeah. Very nicely done.
Israeli baseball team hat, by the way.
There you go. But this is the risk that, and this is why I think the 4 Democrats felt that it was time to say something, not just because of the violence. I'm sure that was the catalyst. That was the main motivation. But I think they also see their party about ready to march off a cliff by following the progressives on this. Yeah. The progressive position on this is very, very, very thin. They are not convincing Americans, and Americans have largely already made up their mind to back Israel here. And the more the progressives take over the Democratic Party on this point, the more it's going to impact Democrats' ability to win elections in any sort of competitive districts, in states that are competitive. Voters don't make up their minds strictly on foreign policy issues. Most of them don't. But the more you have this type of radical thinking that is outside of the political consensus of the electorate popping up in Democrats' speeches and in their social media streams and on their issues pages, the less connected people are going to feel to that party.
Yeah, Democrats need to realize this. So, just like Kamala Harris and Liz Warren learned during the campaign, that social media is not real life. That's why they failed as candidates. They've taken the 8% of people that are on social media or Twitter as the base of the Democratic Party, which isn't even. And I think it's interesting you mentioned this is the first time they've polled it in 20 years. Because Hamas has been around since 1987, I believe. But they didn't really get going as the Hamas we know today until they won the legislative elections in 2005 or 6. So that's almost 20 years ago now. And like Jeff Dunitz and others have said, this was not a war of Israel against the Palestinians. It was a war of Israel against Hamas, which was backed by Iran, which of course is a terrorist state, which is using, unfortunately, probably some of our money to finance Hamas. Nonetheless, Hamas does not use any of the money that they get for infrastructure. They don't use it for jobs. They don't use it for schools. They don't use it for healthcare, Bernie Sanders. The money goes to terror tunnels, the metro system, as they call it. It goes to weapons. It goes to the lavish lifestyles of their corrupt leaders. And notice the Hamas caucus doesn't ever mention Hamas when they're talking. They don't mention Hamas because if they did, they'd have to mention that they use children. Well, they wouldn't mention it, but they use children to protect themselves from missiles. Whereas Israel, of course, the cliche goes or the saying goes, uses missiles to protect children. They would have to talk about Israel using remarkable restraint, unlike Hamas. And if they wanted well, I'm not going to get into it, but if Israel wanted to see suffering, they could do it. Let's put it that way. They could shut down all the power and the electricity and the water in Gaza and turn it into a resort. Americans should sympathize with Israel because they're our number one chief ally in the region. And the people that hate America, the terrorists that attacked us in 9/11, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, whatever, they also hate Israel. They chant death to Israel, they chant death to America. I don't know how that's so hard to understand for some people, but if you're a college student, or you're AOC, who's not that far out of college, or if you're Rashida Tlaib, who is Palestinian. But for the rest of the Democrats, for your girl Betsy McCollum,
my girl,
for Angie Craig,
Angie Craig, okay, Angie Craig is my girl. No, she's my representative. She's not my girl, but she's my representative, and
for Angie Craig, for Pramila Jayapal, for the average Democrat representing a district in Massachusetts or Wisconsin or Florida. Where the heck are they? I mean, I don't think they're pro-Hamas. And their voters probably aren't. You're saying so? Denounce anti-Jewish bigotry. Why is that so hard? We denounce every other kind of bigotry. We support our other allies. They worry about if we're being nice enough to our European allies, who frankly are not as important an ally as Israel, at least in terms of national security, in my opinion. I could go on. It's very frustrating. It was very telling, but very frustrating. And, everyone asked me and other Jews, why do Jews not support Israel? Or why do Jews vote Democrat? And, the answer for a lot of Jews is that they don't care much about Israel, especially Jews under 45 or so who haven't really studied it. And they're secular, and they tend to be suburban living, and they tend to be around more Democrats, and they are more worried about such issues as climate change and gay rights and abortion. And that's the truth. It goes for other religions too, but not as much.
Well, I mean, if we're going to talk about religious vote, there used to be a Catholic
vote. I was leading you into
vote.
that.
Yeah. There used to be a Catholic vote in the United States, and that's mostly just become a reflection of the overall political consensus too. That was back in the day where the Catholic vote was more working class, where Democrats were not actively pro-abortion, and that Catholic vote mattered because it hung together fairly well. These days, there isn't really a Catholic vote per se.
It also depends on your degree of religiosity as a Catholic, I think. I would assume that the more religious Catholics voted less for Joe Biden than they did for Donald Trump. I know Biden's Catholic.
It's tough to generalize, and the reason why I say this is because there is a very strong liberal tradition in the Catholic Church.
Sure.
And you go to Dorothy Day, you go to all sorts of different figures that emerge out of the Catholic Church that have that promoted a very strong, unionizing workers. That there was a big Catholic influence in that, and poverty programs, big Catholic influence in that.
No, it still is. Still is.
Well, yeah, and
Catholic charity and Catholic social services, yeah.
Sure. So the Catholic base is a little less lockstep than, say, evangelicals are, right?
Yeah.
Evangelicals
or Mormons.
Or Mormons, for that matter as well. Smaller group, but much more unified in terms of their electoral power. However, just the idea of a Catholic vote, I think, has gotten so watered down over the last 3 or 4 decades that it just doesn't really exist in any meaningful form. Catholics vote, and you can tally up how the Catholics voted, but there isn't really a Catholic vote anymore. And
it's not Kennedy versus Nixon in 1960, where I'm sure Kennedy got 90% of the Catholic vote.
Oh yeah, definitely. And what I find interesting is that Joe Biden is the second Catholic president of the United States. Reagan was a Catholic initially, and then he changed churches. But is Joe Biden is the second Catholic president of the United States, and other than pointing out the contrast between his public positions and the Catholic Church's teachings, he didn't really run as a Catholic. more or less avoided that topic because he didn't want to have that contrast pointed out, wisely, I think, on his part. And that's what the USCCB is dealing with, right? Is that they're having to deal with the fact that Joe Biden is aggressively pursuing policies that are antithetical to the Catholic Church's position on the sanctity of life. That is, abortion and euthanasia, transgender policies, those types of things. And he's been doing this for a very long time. And, we don't need to get too far into this today, but I just find this interesting, the idea of a religious vote. I don't think it exists in the Catholic Church. I think you have Catholics that like the Democrats for their social policies. You have Catholics that like the Republicans for their policies on abortion and the economy, and that makes them no different than any other group in the election.
Yeah, well, they're also 25% of the country, at least, right? So it's a pretty big group, and you also have Latino Catholics, you have European Catholics, you have African Catholics, you have Middle Eastern Catholics. So there's different ethnic groups of Catholics as well.
Yeah, and the African traditions are very, very conservative. The African bishops are very, very conservative. People forget that, but they're very conservative in Africa, and that's really where the energy and momentum for Catholic expansion globally is coming out of Africa, which makes things very interesting in the Vatican, but probably not so much in terms of American politics. I want to move on to something else, and this is something local here, which was the anniversary of George Floyd's death at the hands of police. That took place on Tuesday, along with the commemoration, which included 30 or so gunshots in the vicinity of George Floyd Square. I know Alpha News is covering this.
Yeah, we are.
And look, I mean, I think that I think there's all sorts of irony in this, especially in the way it was covered. But I mean, I don't have an issue with commemorating it. I do have an issue with having an autonomous zone in the middle of Minneapolis where police don't go. That's a problem. I have an issue with commemorating him as some sort of a martyr. Mm-hmm. I mean, he certainly didn't deserve to die that day, and especially not in the way he did. But even though he never should have died in that situation, he made choices in his life that brought him into that particular situation. So I think it's good to note, it's good to remember what happened in terms of how the police handled it. But I think people make a mistake in turning him into some sort of a hero or martyr, rather than just saying, "Hey, the dude should be alive to face the counterfeiting, charge, and be able to present his own defense in that." That to me, this whole idea of martyrdom is Nancy Pelosi clumsy.
Yeah, I was going to say Nancy Pelosi thanked him for dying, literally.
Yeah. I mean, it's just very awkward. What was your take on what happened on Tuesday?
I didn't pay as much attention to it as you might expect because I was, working on different things. But I have been to a couple of Minnesota Twins games, as you have, and they've got a lot of George Floyd mementos. Seriously, in the gift shop, we've got on the wall a couple tributes. I can't imagine there won't be a statue somewhere in Minneapolis. A lot of people have been shot and killed by police. I mean, honestly, not in the same way, or killed by police, I should say. And, they don't get the recognition, so to speak, as he does because of the video and how it was handled and everything. I get that. But a 9-minute and 29-second moment of silence ordered by the governor of Minnesota? I don't know. There's a lot of people we could order moments of silence for that die each day or each week. Certainly, if Bill Clinton died, well, he's a president, but, famous. There are a lot of famous liberals if they die. Walter Mondale didn't get a moment of silence in Minnesota classrooms and around the country. It's overdone. I'm not going to get into the George Floyd being a criminal or alleged rapist and all that. I don't think that does any good. But they're going to keep this going, and it's not helping. And I have an article coming out tomorrow on Alpha News about crime. And the crime wave really did start on May 27th, essentially, 2020. And the numbers are harrowing. I'm not going to read them, but it was 200 and 300% up in many cities, murder and violent crimes. And that comes from lack of policing, which of course came from what happened last summer with the marches, the anti-police marches that basically the George Floyd tributes became. So it's had a negative effect, and it's not. We don't have a major crime increase because of COVID. In fact, crime should have been down probably because of COVID, since people were not out as much last summer and fall. It's unfortunate. It's going to keep happening. Maybe not to this level, but I think school districts and governors maybe don't need to be forcing people or even asking people to pay tribute. And I think that the gunfire that occurred Tuesday morning, what's the word? It was not symbolic, but it shows you that George Floyd Square, I personally think the George Floyd Square needs to go as an autonomous zone. You want to have a little plaque there and tributes? Fine. But it didn't work out very well in Seattle, the autonomous zone, which was about a year ago. These are not legal places, and the police need to be free to go in and take care of business. And it's not going to happen when you have poor leadership like you have in Minneapolis and Seattle and Portland, and you have police that are down. The Minneapolis PD is down 200 officers since last year.
Yeah,
I think that's the number.
It's a quarter of the force is gone. They've either retired, gone on medical leave, or just quit. Right. And they weren't going to replace them until residents started filing lawsuits, and now all of a sudden, Mayor Jacob, I don't want to say all of a sudden, because Jacob Fry was not one of the guys that was saying abolish the police department.
No, he wasn't.
So I don't want to be unfair about
Only Ilhan Omar, as far as Minneapolis politicians, I think.
No, the whole city council won.
Well, I don't count. They're not politicians. They are, but they're not. I mean, they're not.
Here's the thing, though. It's the city. The city council has the responsibility to manage that police department. It's their responsibility to do it,
which is amazing.
It is, and they've abdicated that responsibility for decades, and now they want to abolish it because they don't want to be held accountable for the way that they've mismanaged it.
They're terrible, and the leader of that. The fact that the leader of the council still has a job and isn't, frankly, in prison, or at least arrested. I mean, she's at Lisa, whatever her name is, the CNN, who now wants police. Yeah, she's about as bad as Ilhan Omar. She might not have as much national influence, but my God.
Yeah, I mean, telling residents that if you're thinking about picking up the phone and dialing 911 because somebody committed a crime against you, you should check your privilege. I mean, this is absurd.
Meanwhile, the people that are victims of most crime are people that usually don't have any privilege. I mean, the council, the mayor, I'm not going to criticize quite as much, but crime hurts minorities and poor people more than middle-class white people and middle-class Asian people. And it's amazing how that defund the police is often led by upper-middle-class white progressives.
It's always led by upper-middle-class white progressives.
Almost all, yeah. BLM leadership is different, but almost always young upper-middle-class progressives. I'm not calling them racist bigots, but it's amazing what they're promoting is hurting poor minority people.
Absolutely, it's
not debatable.
And if you go into the neighborhoods where those community leaders are, they'll tell you that they're down at city council. So back to Jacob Fry. Jacob Fry has had to go to neighboring jurisdictions to beg for police officers so they can so that Minneapolis can get a handle on its violence problem. I mean, that's sad. This is a major metropolitan city having to beg their neighbors for police officers because the city council is chasing their own police officers off the force. It's crazy.
And you can't get rid of the people on the city council because they have to be voted out, right?
Yeah. They have city elections coming up this year, right? I think in November.
What's the turnout going to be? 25%? I mean, Bill de Blasio gets reelected by 50 points in New York City last time. I mean, these city elections have such low turnout. The people that vote tend to be the activists. I'm not that hopeful. I mean, Minneapolis is losing people, obviously, to the suburbs and even to just neighboring towns, and they're not learning. In the city, by the way, Minneapolis, for those of you who don't know, is a very small area in terms of geographic size compared to most major cities. You go 3 miles in any direction, and you're in a different town. You're in Crystal, or you're in St. Louis Park, or you're in other Bloomington, Richfield. So in a way, yeah, the police, maybe the fact is reaching out to the police forces in other towns, it may sound cowardly and pathetic, but frankly, they're not that far away. Maybe they should have some sort of consolidated force, to be honest. I mean, do these towns of 1,200 people do they have their own police force in Lexington, Minnesota? Some of these towns, these 1,200 person towns that are 2 miles away from the next town.
I don't know if they do or not, or if they. I mean, in California, the way that they resolve that, and because I'm from California, the way that they resolve that is usually you have county sheriffs, and they just contract.
Well, San Bernardino County is bigger than most states in California, for example.
Right. Sure. I grew up in a town called Cerritos, and Cerritos was actually a fairly significant city on the edge of Los Angeles County, but they didn't have their own police force. They just contracted out with the LA County sheriffs.
Yeah.
And they just slapped the Cerritos decal on the door.
That's what they do in a lot of parts of in other states too. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Cerritos. Yeah, I know Cerritos.
Yeah. Well, go Dons.
Did you go to college out there too?
I went to college at Cal State Fullerton.
Fuller, good baseball team there, the Titans.
The Titans, go Titans! Yeah, I'm a Titan. Had I graduated, I would have been class of '84.
84. Good year. 84 was a good year, though.
84 was a good year. So yeah, that's usually the way it would work. You could do the same thing, I guess. You could even put together with Ramsey County a dual county law enforcement agency. That might actually solve some problems for both Minneapolis and St. Paul in terms of their police union contracts, because if you dissolve the police union, you dissolve the contract and you start over from scratch. That's how Newark.
That's how they reinvented themselves.
That's how they reinvented themselves, because they had to get out from underneath the huge burden of the cost burden that had grown in Newark. A per police officer basis, and it's the same cost basis that was true in Newark at the time as it is right now in Minneapolis. It's expensive. The union contract has made it very expensive, which is one of the reasons why they've had trouble doing the neighborhood policing strategy, which everybody understands is the most effective strategy. You assign people to particular neighborhoods. You let them get to know the people.
Yeah, it's very individualized.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and St. Paul, by the way, for those of you, again, not from Minnesota, similar size to Minneapolis, I mean, you may not hear about it as much, but they're in the 93rd percentile when it comes to crime as well.
Yeah.
Now, that hasn't always been that way, but it's getting there, like any other major city. So that's the other twin city.
Back 100 years ago, it wasn't that way, because the St. Paul Police Department was corrupt, and they were basically sheltering all the criminals as long as they didn't commit crime
just during Prohibition.
Yeah, it was during Prohibition. Yeah,
St. Paul has a colorful history during Prohibition. I've read about that.
Very colorful history. You had these all these FBI most wanted legendary crime figures that were making the circuit up and down the middle of the country, right?
Yeah, the circuit.
And St. Paul and Minneapolis were the top end of that circuit, and they would take shelter in St. Paul and commit crimes in Minneapolis, because the St. Paul Police Department were
on the
in their
take.
pocket. Yeah, they were on the take, and so the St. Paul Police Department would tip them off of anybody who's coming close, and they take the criminals and go away. Yeah, it's a really interesting history up here, but yeah, that's what's happening up here. Let's turn to face masks. You've got something about face masks, the perpetual face mask. I still wear my face mask in certain situations. I don't wear it outdoors. I do wear it when I'm in. I wear it when the proprietor of the business that I'm in requests that people wear masks, because I believe that they can set the terms of entry, and I'm fine with that, because I respect private property rights. And also when I know I'm going to be in a situation where there's a high density of people around.
Yeah, I mean, most businesses, though, I went to the Toyota dealership today. It says masks are optional. So if they're optional, and no one had them on inside, and you weren't really near anyone that closely, if they're optional and you're not that close to someone, then yeah, there's no reason to wear it inside. Outside, I don't. There's no reason to wear it at all. Frankly, even if you're at a baseball game, in my opinion, with near people. But the virtue signaling that comes with masks, has gotten a little bit much. The article that I think you're mentioning, I wrote. Was it last week or the week before? I think it was last week. I wrote it because there was a New York Daily News headline written by two professors from New York that said masks should remain with us, becoming part of everyday lives until the pandemic subsides, whatever that means in their minds. And then it said we should never fully return to a maskless society. Well, fine. I mean, airplanes are one thing. People have been wearing masks on planes for a long time. Maybe more people will. But that's not going to get us out of the pandemic when you see people, whether it's the president or people on TV with no one around them wearing masks still. So it's a posturing mechanism, I think, at this point. It doesn't slow the spread of disease that much, and it's become a partisan issue. And for kids, my God, I mean, the kids, it's like 285 deaths in children out of the 600,000 kids who have gotten COVID. Or no, 4 million kids that have gotten COVID. Tiny mortality rate. They don't spread it, but that's the whole thing with teachers' unions and schools. I think the point I was trying to make was, you walk around my neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood, a couple hours from the Twin Cities, no one's wearing masks. You go to Minneapolis, you go to New York, people are still wearing them, though maybe not quite as much anymore. I think it's become not only a virtue signaling, but it's discouraging other people from getting the vaccine. I think that's the problem. People who don't want to get the vaccine, but do want COVID to end, they're not going to be as interested in getting the vaccine if they think they're still going to have to wear a mask, or if they see people that are already vaccinated wearing masks, they'll be like, what's the point of wearing a mask when I see Kamala Harris on a Zoom call in a socially distanced room wearing a mask? So it's not helping. Right, Joe Biden. It's not helping. And being lectured by Stephen Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel or some celebrity calling you, a redneck or whatever, or a dumbass, is just going to stoke anger and division. And it's unnecessary. I don't know. It's a long-winded thing. The article's on alphanews.org, and I think the idea of forever masks, some people like them for security or they're antisocial or what have you. But if you don't need to wear them, don't wear them, because you're not helping the cause if you're wearing a mask when there's no risk. You're just going to make people either frustrated at you or make people symbolically think that the pandemic is never going to end. People who just see things visually, if they see people wearing masks all the time on TV, whatever, they're going to think the pandemic's never going to end. But it is slowly ending factually and statistically, and having masks on doesn't help people understand that.
Well, I also think, too, that they're relying on masks. The people who don't want to necessarily, aren't motivated to get vaccinated, are relying on masking be sticking around, without end as a means of protection. Once they have to go out and about with people who are unmasked and maybe unvaccinated, there might be some more motivation. And that's something Allapundit wrote about today, is that there does appear to be, as things are unmasking, there appears to suddenly be more impetus to get vaccinated because these places are removing the mask mandates.
Right. If you can go into Home Depot or Menards, that's a place up here, without a mask, you might be more inclined to get the vaccine. And honestly, it's a fetish for some people. It really is. They're afraid to take off the mask. You've read New York Times people write about it. It's a fetish. Even though outdoor transmission is close to zero, they're wearing masks outside as like a fetish. I'm not saying it's even virtue signaling. The message really should be, Ed, get your vaccine, 1 or 2 doses, depending what you get, wait the 2 weeks, and go live your life.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. Now, but the other thing that I would say is this, is if you want to wear a mask, feel free to wear a mask. And if you don't want to wear a mask, you should feel free not to wear a mask. And I think that at this stage of the pandemic, I think, first off, we're basically coming out of the pandemic at this point in time. But at this stage, I think that you have to shift the burden to the unvaccinated.
Yeah.
The rest of us can't keep assuming the burden of non-transmission when we're not transmitters. I mean, I'm fully vaccinated. I'm assuming you are by this point.
I am.
My wife is fully vaccinated. She is a transplant patient, so she has to be more careful about bugs floating around. So, which is one of the reasons why I'm still not unhappy to put on masks when there's high density populations around. But we were traveling this weekend, I should say, this past weekend. We were traveling. We were in restaurants. We were in airports. We were on an airplane. First time I've traveled since before just as the pandemic was really hitting the United States. I went to CPAC and I came back and I was sick. And I am convinced that I had COVID, not so much by the way that it impacted me, but whatever I had, I passed to my wife, and she was sick for 3.5 weeks, and she had respiratory issues and all that kind of stuff. And I'm convinced that I had it. Now, there's no way I can prove that, and I've been vaccinated since then, so I still can't prove it. But I'm pretty convinced that that's what happened, just because I do know that there were at least a few people there who ended up turning up positive for COVID-19 at the time.
Oh, at CPAC, yeah, there were some people, and there were not masks being worn very much, as far as I could tell.
There weren't masks being worn at all.
And that was in February, which was not at the peak, but still within the not so good time of COVID. So, yeah, I think it's up to people. Go ahead.
I was going to say this is February of 2020, because that was the last time I.
I thought you were mentioning. Oh, okay.
No, not this past. No. It was 16 months since I'd been on an airplane. This is February of 2020, so it just started circulating.
Well, that's different. Yeah.
And so nobody was wearing masks because nobody thought to wear a mask. It wasn't until I got back that I started wearing a mask when I was going out, and the reason why is because I understood that masks are not perfect. It's not the same as immunity. But when you're dealing with viruses, viral load matters. So if you breathe in a nose full of COVID-19, as opposed to just a few particles of COVID-19, even if you get sick, you're likely to be less sick. Your body doesn't have to react so hard, and it doesn't introduce more of the virus into the system as it's replicating. And so that's the reason why masks mattered. And the CDC was wrong about that. Then they reversed themselves. And they were deliberately wrong about it because they were trying to protect the supply rather than just tell the truth and tell people don't buy them. Make some masks at home, but don't buy masks. We have to keep those masks for other people. At any rate, if you're vaccinated and if you're immune, you can't transmit it. And even if you get it, you're almost certainly not going to get symptoms. And even if you get symptoms, they're not going to be severe. At some point, you have to be out in the world and you have to deal with things. And
I think you're right. And I have friends who are not. I wouldn't call them anti-vaxxers, but I'd say they're not going to get vaccinated. And they tell me, well, Fauci said we only need to get to 75% for herd immunity or whatever, and that may be true. And I totally understand that 25% of the country will not be vaccinated. They're just not going to do it, adults. But they're going to have to be. Again, you and I don't want to sound like big government liberals, but there's going to have to be a way to separate people who aren't vaccinated from those who are. I don't believe in the passports. I don't believe in separate sections in restaurants, but there's got to be a way to put the onus on the unvaccinated to steer clear or be safer or whatever it might be. It's complicated. I'm
going to be more libertarian. I think I'm going to dispute you on this. I'll be more libertarian. And we'll duke it out here. Rock'em sock'em robots here.
We still got to duke it out in the future of the GOP though. Before we end today,
that's going to be the next topic is the future of the GOP. But my feeling on this, it gets back to who assumes the burden. I don't think the government has to assume the burden. I don't think that the vaccinated has to assume the burden. If the unvaccinated want to go out and be around and risk contracting COVID, it's really on them. If I'm vaccinated, it doesn't really make any difference what happens to the unvaccinated. And the separation would be, who are we protecting with the separation, with the identification? We're protecting the people who don't want to get vaccinated. Well, let them assume that risk. I don't need to assume that risk, and I don't need to.
Yeah, you're not at risk. You're right. You're right. If you're vaccinated, you're not at risk. I guess theoretically, no, you're right. If your wife weren't vaccinated and you got it and you gave it to her still because she's not vaccinated, yeah, you're right. I mean,
yeah.
It's not a libertarian. It's a libertarian view, but it's a commonsensical view. I didn't mean to say I was in favor of government intervening. I'm just saying.
Well, you said you weren't. So I mean, I want to be clear. I wasn't saying that you were. I'm just saying that we have to look at this in terms of risk assumption.
Risk assumption. That's what it all comes down to.
Yeah. Yep. At a certain point in time, and it doesn't apply. It didn't apply until vaccines were plentiful, right? I mean, you couldn't make this argument in, say, February or March of this year because the vaccine supply was so restricted and so many people couldn't get to it that you couldn't make. You had to assume the unvaccinated. Everybody had to assume that burden themselves. But now it's plentiful. If you want it, you can go walk into a clinic and get it. In fact, they're trying to give it away.
You can get it an hour from right now. Unless you live in a very rural area.
They're trying to pay you.
I know.
to take the vaccine.
I know all of us that got vaccinated early never got paid.
Yeah, I know. I was talking about that with somebody today. It's like, man, I got rooked.
Free twins tickets. There's lots of stuff going on.
Well, I'm not sure. I got to look at this thing. I'm not sure if the free twins tickets is for is a bonus for getting vaccinated, or if you decide you're going to remain unvaccinated, you have to go to Twins games as a punishment.
Good one, Ed. Yeah, I've written a couple articles on the Twins and their struggles since they embraced liberal politics. Although they are playing better the past week, so we'll have to see.
Kirk Crowley says, Tim Miller says people attend CPACs in hopes of running into Morrissey.
Yeah, it's Kirk Crowley, who may do some writing for Alpha News coming up.
Oh, there you go.
Sharp guy, Wisconsinite. We won't hold him against him.
Yeah, well, So, all right, future of the GOP. So on that note, let's shift to the future of the GOP. You've got something to say about that today. And look, I mean, I think it's a common sense thing, is that if you want to win elections, choose electable candidates.
Ed, it's commonsensical, but not if you want to run, Roy Moore types, or Mo Brooks will win in Alabama, I'm sure, even though he's not the greatest candidate. But we've turned Alabama blue for 3 years. There were races that should have been won in Missouri. I think if you run Eric Greitens, former governor of Missouri, who actually is a family friend, full disclosure, great governor until he had a sexual harassment scandal, and a really creepy one at that. He's not electable in Missouri. Missouri's a red state, but it's not deep red. And he's got Steve Bannon behind him. He's got Kimberly Guilfoyle as his chair, who's also been accused of sexual harassment, by the way. It's why she left Fox. You could lose elections like that. Ron Johnson's not going to win in Wisconsin. He's the current senator from Wisconsin. Was a pretty good guy, but has become a real radical, conspiratorial guy. He basically says January 6th didn't happen. He says BLM led it. These are things that are not true, have to be called out. You can win with other people in that state, Mike Gallagher or others. You go to Ohio. I'm talking about Senate races, by the way.
Right.
Because no one's going to pinpoint all the hundreds of House races. Some of them will be close. A lot of them won't. You go to Ohio, Rob Portman, who I believe is a great senator, maybe the best in the country. Some of my friends in Ohio will tell you. He's retiring. J.D. Vance and Josh Mandel, young guys, both guys probably about my age or younger, are they electable in Ohio, which is a reddish state, but not, a state that Barack Obama won twice? I don't know. J.D. Vance seems to be taking the Josh Hawley route, Ted Cruz route, where he just says whatever he wants, fight, and worry about legislating or being consistent later.
Own the libs. Got to own the libs first.
Own the libs, right. And he might win, but... it's the populist wing. Lara Trump's going to run North Carolina. North Carolina's a swing state. She's done some things that I like, some things that I don't. But her last name is still Trump. That could help her. It also can hurt her. I don't know. It's going to be tough for us to win the Senate. We have a bad map, despite what people think. A lot of people don't like to look at maps. The map is not good. The GOP will be lucky to flip one seat, and that could happen in Arizona.
It could happen in Georgia. It could happen with
Warnock. Georgia. I'm sorry. And in Georgia, Raphael Warnock. But you got to pick the right candidate. Herschel Walker might be the right candidate. Former NFL star, black guy.
Huge University of Georgia legend too.
But get him on the debate stage. You don't know. He's never been a politician. There's a couple other guys there that are either politicians or former Navy SEALs that are sharp. You should win that seat because Warnock and Ossoff never should have won, and that was a special election. But GOP has to defend Ohio. They have to defend North Carolina. They have to defend Missouri. They have to defend Pennsylvania, which will be very hard. That's a blue state. They've got to defend Wisconsin, which will be very hard. That's also a blue state. I know Trump won those states in 2016, but they're liberal states. Okay, not quite as liberal.
Wisconsin had been trending to the GOP, and of late it's been trending back.
Yeah, so, yes, and that's unfortunate. I mean, they've got a Democrat. Well, the legislature I think is still Republican, but that's at the state level. We'll see. Arizona's complicated. Mark Kelly up for re-election, ironically, has not been as moderate as his colleague, Kirsten Sinema, considering he's up for re-election. And Arizona still has, a tradition of being a conservative state. But who are you going to run? You're not going to run Kelly Ward, the GOP chair, who's a lunatic, toward the Marjorie Taylor Greene side, who's already tried to win twice in the primaries and failed. There are some other people that are out there. And as far as the House goes, I'm confident we'll take the House, but I think people forget, we only got to pick up, 4 or 5 seats at this point, right?
4 or 5, and you've got redistricting that's going to...
Right, redistricting, which would help, but of the 20 closest elections last time, the GOP won like 18 or 19 of them, right? Something like that.
Yep.
Okay, those aren't guaranteed to be winners again. Some of them were within a couple hundred votes.
Yeah, but I think the turnout model is going to be in the GOP's favor. So I actually think that those close races are probably going to be less close the second time around.
Well, that would be good.
Midterm election turnout models are different than presidential elections.
Yes, for sure. Republicans tend to do better when the more informed people vote. Let's just say. Sorry to my Democratic friends.
Well, I mean, it's partly voter enthusiasm. It's also, in this case, you also have Joe Biden, who is a first-term president running. The first midterm of a first-term president is almost always bad. The only person who
Bush in 2002.
And the only reason why is because of 9/11. You had the rally around the president effect going on in 2000. Did I say 2011? I meant 9/11. Excuse me, 9/11. In 2002, you had that rally around the president effect that was still sort of in place. Really didn't start to dissipate until the Iraq War started the following year, and so that was a special case. But almost always the White House loses seats in the midterms, and I expect that that's going to be the case. I think that Republicans can actually pick up a significant amount of votes. I share, though, your concern about the Senate. I think that the turnout model might limit some of the risk there, but I think Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are going to be very difficult to keep, especially since Johnson's running again, so at least you've got the incumbent there, but Portman's retiring in Pennsylvania, and I don't know who you get.
There's the Vance, J.D. Vance, Josh Mandel populist side, and
that's Ohio, though.
You said Portman. Ohio.
Oh, I did say Portman's Pennsylvania, right?
Portman's Ohio. Toomey is Pennsylvania.
Toomey is retiring. And I'm sorry, yes. I actually think Ohio is less risky than Pennsylvania. And I'm sorry, I always mix up Portman and Toomey. Did I ever tell you the story about when I had Portman on? I had Portman. I was doing a pre-tape for this show, and I had Portman on. I started off with a question about the Steelers. And
nice.
He says, he was very nice about it. He was really actually super sweet about this. He says, Ed, do you think you're talking to Pat Toomey? He's like, oh shit. And then he says, why don't we stop and start again?
Pittsburgh is not that far from. I mean, you can look at Youngstown, Ohio. You're almost pretty close country there.
Yeah, but you're not going to get reelected in Ohio by coming out.
No, not on the Pittsburgh Steelers ticket. No, or vice versa. Yeah, Toomey gets a bad rap. I think he's a decent senator. I think Pennsylvania is a blue state. I think it's a very blue state. I think it's great that Trump won it in 2016, but they haven't had an elected statewide senator before that since Santorum. They haven't had a Republican governor in quite a while. I think we're going to have a tough time winning Ohio, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania. I don't think we're going to pick up Colorado. Anyway, I think it'll be tough. I think also not having Trump on the ballot will help in some places. I don't know if it'll help in Georgia. I don't know.
I actually think it will help. I think it'll help because I think the people who didn't turn out because of Trump's election grapes the last time around will turn out this time.
But they also are Trump people, a lot of them. The people that were convinced that the election was stolen in Georgia, so they may not turn out just because Trump's not in the ballot. And I wanted to get to Trump. I know it's a delicate subject. I've got his bobblehead here, so
There you go.
A Reuters poll came out the other day that said that 53% of Republicans think Trump is still the true president. 61% believe the 2020 election was stolen. And while 55% of respondents from all affiliations said the election was legitimate and accurate, only a quarter said they believe Biden's win was a result of illegal ballot counting. Only a quarter of all people. So there's an out-of-touch group in the Republican Party, and 57% said the election was sullied by illegal voting or election rigging. Again, I don't know who our listeners are. We've got to get over this. We got rid of Liz Cheney because of this. I question that, but I understand why now. We've got to stop talking about it, okay? The Cheney wing, the Kinzinger wing, we'll stop talking about it. But the Trump wing needs to stop talking about it. And this Arizona thing is a disaster. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, it's a disaster. That audit is a disaster.
Doug Wardlow wrote a column for our website that I didn't like, that said that it was sort of important what's going on in Arizona. I wouldn't run on that for Attorney General here in Minnesota. I think some point you have to realize, be smart. We need.
There's such a thing as sunk cost, right? The sunk cost fallacy. I mean, the party and all of its candidates need to cut this loose. You don't have to cut Donald Trump loose if you don't want to, but you need to cut the 2020 election loose.
You do. You need to. The path forward takes elements of what Trump did and his supporters and his policies, blue collar, what have you,
prior to the election,
wraps it around with a more happy warrior veneer, someone who fights for robust conservatism, but also is not going to wink at QAnon and Steve Bannon and that wing. Don't forget, Trump lost to Biden by a lot in the popular vote, but in reality, he lost to him by less. He lost by 3 states: Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, 43,000 votes. He had beaten Hillary by 76,000 votes in 3 other states: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. So it wasn't that big of a landslide that Biden won by. Same electoral college votes as Trump against Hillary. But the 2 months that followed, the Georgia debacle, the January 6th debacle, I think 2020 Republicans or 2024 Republicans should decide that Trump has served his purpose. He'll be 78 years old. Do what we did in 64, after 64, after 76, after 92, and after, I guess you could say, after 08, and move on to different candidates. Yeah, I know Romney got the nomination in 2012, but that's a little different. We've got so many good candidates. We've got, I don't want to start naming people, but when you look at everyone from Pompeo and DeSantis and Pence, sort of on that, Trump administration wing, to Haley, to senators like Rubio, Cotton, Tim Scott, maybe even Ted Cruz, not my guy, but, throw him in there. Kristi Noem. There's a lot of candidates. I don't know what the obsession is with running a guy who's been on the ticket the last 2 times, who lost to Biden, and who has, he has a base of support, but are those people going to sit out and let Biden or Harris win again? It's frustrating. They need to let go of the last election. They need to stop talking in QAnon, and they need to stop bashing people within your party. And that goes both ways.
It does. Both wings need to stop bashing each other. And I fully agree with that. There used to be a distinction between the two parties. That was I would call it a positive distinction, which was that Republicans were fact-based and I say evidence-based and incorporated human frailties into their policies, whereas liberals, before they became progressives, were more utopian and were less cynical about human beings, but more embracing of big government as a way to help perfect or to eliminate the failings of human nature.
Right.
Yeah. And you can make arguments either way, and depending on which policies are which, sometimes you have people in the middle that kind of flip back and forth. We don't even have that anymore, right? We've just got we've started to settle into this idea that, and honestly, this is antithetical to the whole conservative movement, that everybody has their own view of truth and everybody's view of truth is legitimate, and it's simply not the case. And we would do so much better to be fact-based, even when the facts dictate against the policies that we're backing. Budget, for instance. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Had to clear my throat. Spending.
Right. I got it. I don't. The grievance aspect of the GOP is not becoming.
Yes.
And that is part of the party. It's some people on Fox News. I think there's a grievance side to some hosts on Fox News in the primetime hour. 2 of them in particular. There's a few senators and quite a few House members who have this grievance, whether it's racial, geographical, what have you. That's not what the Republican Party's about. Now, they can argue and say, well, we're fighting. That's not fighting. That's whining.
Yes.
That's whining. That's not fighting to me. You can fight without whining, and you can fight to win without relitigating the 2020 election. And if we lose the midterms or don't get the windfall that we hope, you can blame, or I can blame, the cranks and the charlatans who were intent on reminding persuadable voters in the suburbs or whatever that the GOP is still stuck relitigating the past. Not to mention January 6th, which is not something anyone should want to relitigate. I mean, for political reasons, the Democrats do, but I think it's pretty easy going forward, but I'm not a big fan of populism, and that puts me apart from some Republicans. I realize that.
I'm not a big fan of populism. I think that look, I mean, I think that if you take a look at the stuff that I said, look, this isn't going to work from the populist agenda. I think clearly I was wrong on trade. I think the tariffs actually accomplished some things, especially here in North America.
Yeah, depends who. The consumer, the farmer, the steel producer. It depends who.
Yeah. What I would argue, though, is that, yeah, there's winners and losers from this, but prior to that, this is a mea culpa on my part, prior to that, we weren't even talking about who the winners and losers were from NAFTA.
Right.
And we had completely ignored the fact that there was a whole bunch of losers in NAFTA, and we were ignoring them because we were saying, learn to code, basically. I mean, that's what Hillary Clinton said in 2016.
Yeah, learn to code is never a good thing, yeah.
No, but that's the way Republicans were addressing that issue up until 5 years ago. And so I'd say that there's some parts of the populist approach that actually does work, that actually was a blind spot to some conservatives. But what we saw there, it gets very easy to get to wretched excess with populism. It gets very easy to get to mob rule with populism, regardless of what version, what flavor of populism we're talking about. Conservative populism, progressive populism. It can become dangerous, and I think we saw that. We saw that in this sort of detachment from reality, or the creation of your own reality. I think if we want to get back to, if Republicans or conservatives, preferably both, want to get back to a consistent philosophy, the first thing that they have to do is settle on the fact that there is an objective reality, there are objective truths, and that's what we should be basing everything that we do on, not on how it makes us feel.
You shouldn't have to mention that to Republicans. My God, that sounds like conservatism in a nutshell. Don't judge everything based on emotion or how you feel, and live in a reality where there is truth. Gee. Yeah, and the truth is, that's a winning message, I think. Now, did you know that Paul Ryan is speaking tonight at the Reagan Library? Paul Ryan?
No, I didn't know that. I like Paul Ryan. I like a lot of people. A lot of populists hated Paul Ryan. I've never.
No, that's what made me think of it. I like Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is a staunch conservative. Ask any liberal. He was their most hated Republican in 2012. So when I hear people calling him Paul Rhino, maybe that sounds funny. He's the farthest thing from a rhino, unless the Republicans have become a bunch of leftists. I have an excerpt from his speech that goes well closing out this. He's going to speak at the Reagan Library tonight, West Coast, so probably hasn't started yet. He says, in excerpts that have been released to A.J. Kaufman at Alpha News, although I'm sure they're available elsewhere. Once again, we conservatives find ourselves at a crossroads, and here's one reality we have to face. If the conservative cause depends on the populist appeal of one personality or on second-rate imitations, then we're not going anywhere. One more paragraph. In 2020, the country wanted a nice guy who would move to the center and depolarize our politics, referring to Biden. Instead, we got a nice guy pursuing an agenda more left-wing than any president in my lifetime. These policies might have the full approval of his progressive supporters, but they break faith with the middle-of-the-road folks who made the difference for him on Election Day. And those middle-of-the-road folks are the ones that the Republicans need to pursue in the midterms and in the election of 2024, and you got to have the right candidates to appeal to those.
Yep. Paul Ryan 2024?
He would never make it out of the primary. I think he'd be a great president, and he might be able to win nationally. He'd never make it out of the primary because he's despised, unjustly despised, just like Mitch McConnell is by some people, and I suppose Kevin McCarthy or John Boehner, or whoever you want to say. They're all different, but no, Paul Ryan was picked for VP for a reason under Romney, and he's a good guy and still very young and articulate and intelligent. And he was warning about these entitlements and the spending way before any of us were. No, I mean, yeah. And yet we have the budget coming out tomorrow, which we're not going to have time to get into, but $6 trillion or whatever by Biden. It's not going to happen, but the Republican Party needs to get back to Paul Ryan economics instead of Tucker Carlson populism. Oops, did I say that?
Well, populism's popular these days.
That's why it's called popularism or something.
Yes. Well, it's always been there, but it hasn't always been popular. Populism and popular isn't always necessarily popular, but it is at the moment in both parties. Bernie Sanders' movement is
well, that's
populism.
why Bernie Sanders, yeah. Gee, I mean, Ross Perot was a populist. Theodore Roosevelt was a populist. I get it.
They were more center populists, but yes.
Yes.
And look, I mean, Perot was a smart guy. If you go back and listen to, before he went nuts and started accusing George H.W. Bush of sabotaging his daughter's wedding, which was just insane, his economic policy was really smart. And it was easy to see why people.
The only thing about Ross Perot, and I respect him, but he also got Bill Clinton elected, and it's hard to forgive that.
He did. Yes, he did. And
not intentionally per se, but he did.
Yes. But so again, populism, I think, helps us look at the evidence and sort of check our, do the crazy Ivan to check and see if we got blind spots in the baffles and that sort of thing. But if you're going to move forward on a conservative basis, one of the smartest conservatives in public life that I've ever seen is Paul Ryan. And so it's always worth listening, even if you don't want to support him for office. It's worth listening to what he has to say. He's
and he took the leadership role that no one wanted as Speaker of the House because he sacrificed his whole career, at least to this point, to be Speaker. And I respect that. And I think he was a decent Speaker. It's the hardest job around, whether you're Nancy Pelosi or John Boehner or Kevin McCarthy or whatever. The House leader's a very tough job. He took it when no one else wanted it, and it cost him his career because right now he might have been governor or running for president or what have you. Senator.
Yeah.
And he was running for Senate. Hey, wait.
He could run for Senate. He could run for Senate.
Better than Ron Johnson.
Well, I don't think he'd run against Ron Johnson. I think if Johnson decided he didn't want to run, Paul Ryan might be induced to
I may have to drive over to Wisconsin and pay Mr. Johnson to visit and tell him to not run.
Well, you do that, AJ Kaufman, and of course, but don't stop writing at Alpha News MN. That's alphanewsmn.com or alphanews.org. Either one will take you to the same spot. They're on Twitter at alphanewsmn. And AJ writes for them on a pretty continuous basis, and he's here every couple of weeks to spend some time with us and go over all of the issues of the day. And AJ, thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Look forward to it, Ev. Thanks.
All right. AJ Kaufman has been my co-host for today's Ed Morrissey Show. I want to thank everybody for being with us. Just really quickly, wrapping things up. I don't really have anything in terms of scheduling yet. A week from tomorrow, if all goes as planned, I will be starting a 6-day run on Relevant Radio. So Friday the 4th, and then all the following week after that, that's 3 to 6 Eastern Time, filling in for Drew Mariani, and that is always a lot of fun to be there with the Relevant Radio audience. And being part of that whole family. They're great. Other than that, nothing much new. We're going to be back on Tuesday with Andrew. Don't forget that Monday is a holiday, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to juggle AJ around, because I was realizing, hey, wait a minute. This isn't going to work if he's on Mondays, because I'm not going to be around I'm going to be out and about on Memorial Day. So Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast. Wednesday, of course, we'll have the VIP Gold Chat at 1:30 Eastern Time with Cam Edwards. Dwayne should be back next week on Thursday, so we'll have Dwayne on Thursday next week. And one of those nights I should be doing the after show with Dwayne. Lots of moving parts over the next few weeks, though. Things might shift around and change, so I'll just try to keep you guys abreast of those changes when they happen. But want to thank everybody for being with us. Let's play a little walking music here as we go out and say hi to all the people who have been with us. I have to like myself over on Facebook because, like I always say, you can't know who likes you until you like yourself. Aww. I'm sure that's a thing. At least it's a thing on Facebook if you want to find out who's clicked on the likes, the loves, the laughs, because it doesn't show you that anymore unless you've done it for yourself. All right, over on the crankytrx.com/chatasar chat room, the traditional Ed Morrissey Show chat room. Cranky was in and then he left. But you can find him at crankytrx on Twitter. crankytrx.blogspot.com is his blog. Bob Knox, Jeff Dunnitz from lidblog.com, and Severe Cruise Conservative from Coolidge Foundation, CoolidgeFoundation.org is where you can find Severe Cruise Conservative. I'm not sure if that's actually up and running. I'm not sure if anybody's over there, but they were there earlier, so they're still here in spirit. Over on the Facebook side, who's giving us the likes, the loves, the laughs? Fausta Rodriguez-Wertz from FaustasBlog.com, at Fausta on Twitter, James Leo Garner, Jay Nussbaum, Joseph Zapata, Diane Fowler, Dennis Nels, Brian Britton, David Calhoun, and James Ray with the likes. Giving us the loves today, Teresa LaRocco Badalamente, Jack R. Johnson, and Tony Lisenby. Could be Lisenby if I mispronounced it, Tony. I apologize, but thanks for being here. Let's see if there's anybody else. Kurt Crowley, of course, was here. Myron Kaufman was part of this today. Jeff Dunnett is there. Matthew Dill is here. Yeah, goodness, all of the Minnesota contingent was around. John Bender. Anybody else that I'm missing here? Brian Berkey was here. Brian Berkey. It's always great to see Brian Berkey there. Shirley Whiteley. And I think that's it. Tad Stryker was here. Said Ed and AJ should discuss critical race theory in Major League Baseball. That would have actually been a pretty good topic. I wouldn't have been prepared to talk about it today, Tad, if you're still with us. But maybe we'll take a look at that, and we'll talk about that the next time AJ's on. Until then, though, folks, have yourselves a great weekend. Don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show. We'll see you next week.